Mystics of the abyss and magisters of the night and shadows, rapacious, domineering, and unapologetically arrogant.
Wielding the shadows is an extension of controlling the darkness into which we are all embraced.
In the mind of a Lasombra, it is better to reign in hell than to serve in heaven. Fear, frenzy, the power to determine whether another lives or dies, these are at the root of the power that the Lasombra hold dear. Where other vampires either hold the beast at bay or give themselves fully to it, the Lasombra beat the beast into submission, invoking it when it suits them, but leaving it trapped inside when they wish to govern themselves. It is with these inclinations that the Lasombras style themselves as a dark nobility, an aristocracy of the night that chose the supremacy of the Cainites over reverence for the masquerade. Their regard for such ideas as redemption and salvation are cynical at best, and much of the pomp that shaped the clan's pre-Sabbat outlook remains only with a sense of the blackest irony or open mockery. The grandeur and rituals of the Catholic Church and gentility remain dear to the Lasombra, however, and the clan was instrumental not only in establishing many of the rituals of the Sabbat, but in the institutions that keep it from descending into chaos each night. Whether they see themselves as God's instruments or as outcasts from his creation, the Lasombra believe they have a duty, whether to sect, clan, pack, or even just themselves, and obligation to their responsibilities gives them a sense of purpose night after night. Even a Lasombra shovelhead may consider themselves a cut above the rest, with a surprising number of Lasombra mass embraces surviving. While the night belongs to all kindred, the Lasombra are truly born to darkness, to the degree that their very clan name reveals their ties to the shadow. Theirs is the discipline of obtenebration, and it allows them to wield the stuff of shadow and darkness, and even reach beyond the darkness of the physical world into the abyss that lies beyond. The leaders of the Sabbat, Clan Lasombra, are social Darwinists, predators, elegant, and inhuman. Firm believers in the worthy ruling and the unworthy serving, the Lasombra have maintained their traditions even as they have turned the Sabbat to their own purposes. We will talk more about the Sabbat in a minute, but I already made a video all about them, which you can watch here. The history of Clan Lasombra starts with the Lasombra antediluvian, whose name has been lost to the ages. Even the identity of his sire is not clear, so I will refer to him interchangeably as Lasombra and Lasombra antediluvian. The Lasombra describe their forefathers' mortal life as unremarkable. He was always close to darkness, and when the Great Flood came, Lasombra reveled in it. When the waters subsided, Lasombra joined his brethren in the second city until the revolt against the second generation led to their judgment by Cain. I mentioned this briefly in my video on the Nosferatu, but I'll be discussing this further in an upcoming lore video about Cain. The Ventrue are eager to point to Lasombra as the main culprit of the revolt, brought about due to jealousy of Ventrue, who they believed was the rightful and approved ruler of the third generation. I talk about the Ventrue and their belief in their divine right to rule in a dedicated lore video you can watch here. The Lasombra themselves say nothing about the matter, increasing the mystery around their antediluvian. One thing we do know is Lasombra's connection to the sea is something that echoes through his bloodline, and many elder Lasombra develop the urge to submerge themselves in bodies of water. After the fall of the second city, Lasombra returned to the sea, eventually settling on an island in the Mediterranean, which one is not certain, and from there assumed command over pirates, directing them against the civilizations populated by the progeny of his fellow antediluvians. Still, Lasombra himself was seen little in those days. He dwelled upon an island, some said, or in the depths of the dark sea, rising from time to hunt and to guide his worshippers. Occasionally, he granted his embrace to a chosen few, but less and less often as time passed. For centuries, the Sea People were strong under the watchful guidance of their dark god. After the eruption of Thera, a major catastrophic volcanic event and one of the largest on Earth in recorded history, darkness clouded the sky and Lasombra left the sea, wandering extensively across the Earth, visiting strange cultures and engaging in social experiments to seek desirable childer. One of these experiments involved a tribe of Proto-Maasai people, a Neolithic ethnic group inhabiting northern, central, and southern Kenya and northern Tanzania. They were ordered to produce a child, and this child was to be trained to lead by having every member of the tribe obey him, and he was to be trained to be loyal by extensive gifts and rewards from the Lasombra antediluvian. The experiment failed, however, and before rerunning the experiment, Lasombra was visited by the child's playmate Ontai. Ontai was a shaman in training, and he offered himself in life, death, and beyond with no price offered in return to Lasombra, who had already punished his tribe for the experiment's its failure by wiping out half of its population. La Sombra, disturbed by the offer, tested Antai's resolve and demanded that he slaughter the rest of his tribe. Antai obeyed, and the shaken La Sombra antediluvian called off the execution and embraced Antai, renaming him Montano and bringing him back with him to the Mediterranean. During these times of La Sombra's rovings, his progeny were left free to discover the world around them. Reveling in piracy and the freedom of the sea, most La Sombra fought against both Greeks and Romans, refusing to accept the feeding rights of any Cainite overlords. Others traveled to Iberia and the lands of the Roman Republic. Some particularly adventurous La Sombra even traveled so far as China, where their brood still survive, secluded and hidden away from the wrathful Cathaeans, also known as the Kuei Jin. Together with the Ventrue and Malkavians, the La Sombra clan ruled over the Roman Empire until it dissolved. But while the Ventrue left for the north and the Malkavians scattered amongst suspicion and fear, the La Sombra remained. I discussed the Malkavians' difficulties in a lore video that you can watch here. The La Sombra antediluvian returned from one of his many expeditions in the early age of the Roman Republic, taking up residence in Sicily and building himself the tomb fortress that would be called the Castle of Shadows by his descendants. There he would remain in torpid meditation, attended only by his closest childer, contemplating the great abyss. Occasionally he would waken and leave without announcement, continuing a keen interest in the developments of the world, searching for more potential childer. This made him one of the more active antediluvians of the time, as the only other directly active antediluvian was Tremere. In medieval times, the La Sombra were centered around the Mediterranean in the feudal realm of the Sea of Shadows, headed by their antediluvian himself. The Sea of Shadows was one of the great kindred feudal realms of the age and was nominally under his control, but he delegated much of the administration to his child Montano. The La Sombra were heavily involved with the religious constitutions of this age, particularly the Roman Catholic Church, and with Islam, leading to an internal conflict between the two factions within the clan that resulted in the Shadow Reconquista in Spain, where both sides battled against each other for control over the peninsula. Most La Sombra had strong ties to the clerics and nobility and were able to utilize them to their own endings. The Sabbat scholars claim that the La Sombra antediluvian sealed his fate when he introduced the young Italian bishop, Graziano de Ferronese, into the clan, ignoring warnings from Montano. Among the La Sombra, there is still debate about the motives of their antediluvian to introduce Graziano, who was supremely power-hungry even as a mortal, into the clan. Some believe it was a plan that had gone awry. Others believe that La Sombra finally felt the weight of the ages and wanted to commit suicide by child. Others said that his mind had become feeble and weak, but most believe that it does not matter. Graziano aligned himself with the Banu Hakim to set up an anarch assault on the Castle of Shadows where La Sombra was in torpor. His well-devised plan allowed the anarchs to succeed in overrunning the La Sombra clan's court, with most of the elders being killed in the onslaught. Graziano and his men infiltrated the antediluvian's tomb and destroyed whatever was there. It is unclear whether or not he committed diablerie on his master, as there were no eyewitnesses present. Later, Graziano convened the Amici Noctis, or Friends of the Night, a vampiric society that largely governs the clan La Sombra, and presented them with what he had done. Graziano dared them to condemn him, taunting them that if they did not stop him now, he would remake the clan into something new. The friends listened and stepped aside. Some friends chose to join with Graziano's revolt, while others kept quiet and let events unfold. The great rebel announced that he would not claim the status of clan founder. Instead, he said that he was quite content being a member of Clan La Sombra now that the monster who was the founder was gone. Now every member of the clan could decide for himself what the lineage meant and act accordingly. No single will would thereafter run the clan. Graziano explicitly suggested that the Friends of the Night not anoint a successor to the antediluvian, which Montano frantically campaigned against, but to no avail. Consequently, Montano and a handful of his supporters became a roving clan in exile, although he and his followers did nominally join the Camarilla at its founding, becoming the first La Sombra antitribu. Many La Sombra flocked behind Graziano, hoping to overthrow their scheming sires and gain their power. Most among them refused the Convention of Thorns, a peace agreement between the leaders of the Camarilla, the Anarchs, and the Banu Hakim, seeing it as a submission to the despised Ventrue and the Kine without even proper negotiations. I made a video about the Camarilla and the Anarchs, the first of which you can watch here. In response, the La Sombra, along with the Amici and like-minded members of the clans formed the Sabbat. The Sabbat would be very different without the influence of the Lasombra, and they remain its most prominent clan. During the Victorian Age, the influence of the church upon people's lives declined, and as a result, Lasombra influence became more indirect as the years progressed. The Lasombra began to influence the bourgeoisie, where most of the world's finances now flowed from. Unlike other clans who had previously infested religious organizations, the Lasombra did not turn away from the churches. Indeed, the Lasombra are infamous, even in modern nights, for their powerful grasp in religious circles, particularly the Catholic Church. During this age, many Lasombra sat down to codify clan-specific traditions into proper paths of enlightenment, an alternate code of morality which a vampire subscribes to in an effort to stave off the beast within the Black Monastery, both a physical monastery in Switzerland and the name of a convention of Sabbat vampires brought together for this very purpose. In the New World, various Sabbat civil wars threatened the rule of the clan over the Sabbat and forced them to restructure the sect several times. The Purchase Pact defined the enemies of the sect to end various infightings, while the revised version of the Code of Milan formalized a more structured approach to internal control. In both cases, the Lasombra clan were heavily involved into these revisions. Whether they approve or not, Clan Lasombra has changed with the times. Where once the elitist ideals saw that only those of certain lineages, ethnicities, or religions were embraced, the clan now recruits from all walks of life. Financial influence is now increasingly important to them due to the establishment of a global economy, and the Lasombra are the clan mainly responsible for bankrolling much of the Sabbat's operations in modern nights. The Lasombra still hunt their hated Antitribu, although fewer and fewer exist each night. The fervor with which their brothers are hunted has brought about a Darwinism of its own. Those Antitribus surviving are generally the oldest and wiliest to still walk the earth. After the rise of the Second Inquisition, Amici Noctis reached out to trusted Lasombra, those with reputations for clan over sect loyalty, and arranged diplomatic missions to the Anarchs and the Camarilla. At first, these representatives are to make solitary offerings of fealty to the Camarilla before petitioning for the entry of the entire clan. Probably at least half the Lasombra will remain in the Sabbat, but will lack central authority or direction if the Amici Noctis are going full ivory tower. For the Lasombra, the Knights of High Aristocracy never faded, and the titles and offices a modern onlooker might associate with history still carry great weight among the Keepers, as the Lasombra are sometimes called. A complex system of patronage, mentorship, and lineages characterizes the clan, similar to the courts and churches of centuries gone by. Childer benefit greatly from esteemed sires and vice versa, while acts that confer sect or clan status may also elevate a Lasombra's peers, so long as they associate their success with their fellows. Lasombra naturally seek positions of power and authority, and as a result, they form the bulk of the Sabbat's administrative offices. Simici are more likely to be pack priests, while the Lasombra focus on the practical matters of administration and leadership. The Lasombra operate under the metaphor of shadows. They do not stand in the limelight, preferring to manipulate others to their own ends while doing as little as possible to make themselves a target. This is not done solely out of fear, but because many Lasombra have domineering and superior personalities that necessitates having someone beneath them. Their role is usually filled by mortals, though they are not quite as adept at manipulating the living world as the Ventrue are. Those cultures that still revere the Catholic Church often have several generations of Lasombra pulling their strings. Those who find themselves under the control of a Lasombra can expect a demanding and unrewarding experience. The Lasombra will use any and all tools available to ensure loyalty, such as the blood bond, coercion, physical intimidation, and unapologetic use of the disciplined dominate. The wise Lasombra will judge just how much of this force is necessary. Use too little and the servant is untrustworthy. Too much and the servant is spineless and afraid to act when they need to act. As I already mentioned, the Lasombra maintain a clan-specific organization, the Friends of the Night, and while a Lasombra can be in the clan and not a Friend of the Night, all Lasombra who matter are part of the organization. The Friends are something of a formalized favor network within the Lasombra. They grant prestige and prestitation, but the most notable feature of the Friends are the Courts of Blood, an institution serving as an instrument to regulate clan policies. Oversimplified, whoever suspects a clanmate of falling short in his or her stature turns to a court of blood to attain permission to execute or even diablerize them. The Lasombra are a clan driven by ambition, and consequently they accept diablerie as a necessary facet of their existence. From the Lasombra perspective, the only tragedy in diablerie is that such an unworthy vampire as the Vessel was sired in the first place. The court system ensures that diablerie is managed. Lasombra are allowed, if not flat out encouraged, to cannibalize appropriate targets, but those targets must be judged worthy of this attention by a court before the attack can take place. Lasombra vampires cast no reflection. Whether in a mirror, in a body of water, on a polished surface, or in the rear view of a taxicab, the image of the keeper does not reflect. This curious anomaly even extends to the clothes they wear and the objects they carry. Many kindred believe that the Lasombra have been cursed in this manner for their vanity. Additionally, due to their penchant for darkness, Lasombra are especially vulnerable to sunlight. In Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition, the Lasombra have a bane. They are halfway drawn into the abyss, operating on a different wavelength of reality than other vampires. Their reflections and recordings distort, flicker, or become transparent. Microphones have the same difficulty with the vampire's voice as cameras have with their image, and touch technology becomes unresponsive at best. Similarly, modern technology relying on other forms of direct interaction, such as the use of a stylus, tends to glitch or simply act unresponsive as well. And electronic detection systems easily pick up the telltale signs of a Lasombra passing through. It's as if they exist on a slightly different frequency to other beings, flickering in and out of light. Consequently, many Lasombra have a tendency to handle technology for them, although it should be noted that the Lasombra, as a rule, loathe ghouls with a passion. To them, a mortal in the world of canines is as absurd as a poodle putting on a tutu and walking around on its hind legs. Due to their command of potence and dominate, mortals are laughably easy to control, both physically and mentally. After all, how could the Lasombra possibly respect or value such a pathetically weak and frail thing? As a consequence, the ghoul of a Lasombra is typically a sniveling and timid wretch, living in terror of a single mistake which could end their lives. Lasombra ghouls fall into two broad categories. The first are the raft of accountants, lawyers, and bankers that the Lasombra need to keep the finances rolling in, and perhaps these are the luckier of the two groups. As long as the books balance at the end of the day, they will live to see another one. The second group caters to the Lasombra's difficulty with their own image. Some Lasombra keep an army of personal attendants, scores of ghouls to brush the mistress's hair, do her makeup, and dress her, for example. Such attendants are punished severely for infractions. If the hair is not brushed with exactly 100 strokes, the ghoul might find themselves on the wrong side of the hairbrush. Also, due to the Lasombra's curse, ghouls of either stripe might have their faces reduced to identical spiderwebs of scar tissue, or be forced to wear featureless white masks. The Lasombra consensus holds that overly rigid structures turn on their creators. Thus, the institutions within the clan operate flexibly and with substantial local autonomy. These informal distinctions are just as earnest as anything chartered and codified, but they are much more lethal for being open to interpretation, like any court of blood can prove. Most of the Lasombra subcultures have no organization or even a well-known name. They are outlooks rather than institutions. A group that became organized enough to challenge the courts would be co-opted and folded into the Friends, or destroyed, depending upon how well the group's leaders pled their case. Having said that, there are some notable factions within the clan Lasombra. The Corsairs are Lasombra that have answered the call of the sea. They spend most of their time on the waves, often masquerading as pirates, and some never come on dry land. The Crusaders view the Sabbat as a religious and military organization, almost to the exclusion of the Sabbat as an ideology of freedom. The faithful draw their traditions from the stronghold of the Lasombra within the Catholic Church. Ardent followers of God and believers in their own damnation alike, these individuals seek to fulfill the will of God in this world. The kings and queens of Shadow take part in mortal institutions, exerting influence, gathering resources, and in general keeping the mortal population unaware of the vampires among them. Most have distanced themselves from regular Sabbat activities to maintain their humanity. The Children of the Abyss follow the ancient traditions of Abyss mysticism, often paying only lip service to the Sabbat, but staying in line as the sect provides them with the means to pursue their arcane art. Transhumanists revel in their predatory nature and seek to perfect their undead state. Transhumanists quantify their various powers, work out taxonomies, and otherwise seek to reduce vampirism to data. Many have a keen interest in mortal technology, particularly in those that augment the human body. Fatalists are those Lasombra that have stopped to believe in the freedom of will. Many claim that their blood ties them directly to the elders and Methuselahs of their clan, and these beings are in charge of the destinies of their progeny. The Doomed are an exhibitionistic lot among the clan that do not believe in the value of secrecy and aim to gain immediate and direct control of their environment, often without concerns to the kine. Many Lasombra kill those clanmates on sight. Also called Angelus Aeter, possibly in remembrance from a bloodline originating from the Dark Ages, which we will discuss in a moment, these Lasombra revel in their state as servants of Satan and enemies of God, practicing Satanism and other socially repulsive things. The factionless are those Lasombra that have not yet found an overlying purpose within the history of the clan and give more regards to their sect than to their heritage. Lasombra, like most clans, have variants that distinguish them from the main clan body. The Angelus Aeter are an odd bloodline that crosses boundaries between Bali, a bloodline of vampires associated with demon worship, and Lasombra. They also have the same weakness as other Lasombra and do not cast reflections. The bloodline has been around since at least the Middle Ages, descended in part from a powerful Bali called Azaniel. This monstrous vampire acted as a leader within the Bali line for a time and twisted the orthodoxy of some kindred enough to create a kind of heresy, one that was all too attractive to the Lasombra. The Keeper's power base traditionally included the Catholic Church, and over time the Angelus Aeter made at least some encroachment with these pious or pious-seeming Lasombra. How much influence in the Church they were able to wield is not known, but they did survive the Inquisition. Angelus Aeter are rare in modern nights, but they do exist. The so-called Black Angels believe that vampires are the instrument of Satan, and they worship sin and the darkness of the soul. Their Lasombra blood lets them reach into the blackness, pull it forth, and manipulate it, and the Black Angels become dependent upon and addicted to the use of the obtenebration discipline over time. The Angelus Aeter have lacked organization since their fall during the Dark Ages. After Azanael almost killed all of them, they started to slowly decrease in number until around 50 remained during the 20th century. The Arabian Lasombra, Qabilat al-Khayal, were notable among their Islamic kindred counterparts in that they were one of the few to be majority Christian. Islam took hold in a few places in the clan, especially Iberia, and caused major rifts. Those Christian Lasombra in the Qabilat al-Khayal felt trapped and torn by refusing to adapt to the Islamic religion there. The Islamic ones, however, were some of the most devoted to Islam's cause. Even in modern nights, there are Lasombra that eschew contact with the Sabbat and remain part of the Ashira, the sect under which Islamic vampires declare their faith in Allah. There are no Lasombra anti-tribu, at least not according to the Lasombra themselves. The Sabbat Lasombra deny that traitors exist, while the so-called anti-tribu see themselves as Lasombra, nothing more, nothing less. Not all Lasombra who disagree with the clan's stance within the Sabbat join the Camarilla. A significant percentage of this relatively small number simply go independent and absent themselves from vampiric politics entirely. The remainder, however, seize for themselves positions of respect and authority, if not prominence, in the Camarilla. Philosophically, Camarilla Lasombra differ little from their Sabbat compatriots on a basic level. The anti-tribu still fully expect to win the jihad, and they just see the Camarilla as a more efficient and effective tool for doing so than the Sabbat is. Distaste for the rabble the Sabbat is encased in, it shows clearly in the attitudes of the Camarilla Lasombra, as they regard the Sabbat tactic of mass embraces as wasteful and insulting. Indeed, even the supporters of anti-tribu inclusion in the Camarilla see these vampires as haughty, arrogant, and impatient. Few suffer fools or incompetent underlings to live, and the penalty for failing an assignment set by a Lasombra anti-tribu is often death. The position occupied by these few self-exiled kindred is an ambiguous one. On the one hand, these vampires are Lasombra, the core of the dreaded Sabbat, and no Camarilla vampire is ever completely certain that the defection is a real one. On the other hand, essentially all Lasombra anti-tribu are creatures of undeniable power and presence, and are devoted to the destruction of the Sabbat in a way that few other kindred are. The Camarilla cannot afford to waste these Cainites' talents, powers, and knowledge of the enemy, but cannot afford to trust them entirely either. The Lasombra are frequently attractive, whether through the Spanish, Italian, and Moorish stock associated with the clan, or due to a more cosmopolitan modern background, the Keepers cut a striking figure. Their dress is often conservative or religious, drawing on years of ceremony and faithful ritual. Rare is the Lasombra who cannot at least manipulate shadows to effect a dramatic entrance or enigmatic pose. Lasombra are fiercely predatory creatures, and the Lasombra mindset is defined by an enthusiastic embrace of social Darwinism. The Lasombra firmly believe that power is best held by the most worthy, and that the primary test of worthiness is acquiring said power. As a result, they are voracious, backstabbing, power-hungry, and unapologetically arrogant about their position. Needless to say, the Lasombra and Ventrue despise each other, and historically, the two clans have sought out parallel dominions. The Lasombra focused on the Mediterranean, the Ventrue on Germany. The Lasombra went to the church, the Ventrue went to the state. The Lasombra went to the Sabbat, the Ventrue to the Camarilla. And finally, the Ventrue presumed their claim of rulership over all Cainites through their lineage from the first of the third generation, while the Lasombra claimed leadership over them as the clan who first managed to slay their antediluvian founder. Lasombra pride themselves on doing things with style and elegance. That does not mean they all dress alike, act alike, or furnish their havens the same way, with many young Lasombra maintaining communal havens with other members of their pack, while wealthier keepers and those who predate the sect often maintain their own havens, whether sinister penthouse suites or sprawling old-world villas. For a Lasombra, almost anything can be elegant. One of the classic Lasombra virtues is the gift of exposition, allowing one vampire to explain to others why this particular choice is in fact elegant. The clan favors its members who can articulate their preferences in a persuasive manner, but frowns on efforts to shock, unless they work. Managing to introduce something so unfamiliar that it tramples on existing assumptions and yet, with explanation, manages to fit clan decree is one way to win a great deal of honor. That stated, the Lasombra hold of the Mediterranean and the church has left odd marks on their clan culture. As I mentioned, many Lasombra are drawn to the sea, and many of them are sailors. Even now, the Lasombra are prone to some ancestral Catholicism, still viewing the world in Catholic terms, believing in God and their own damnation with equal certainty. Elder Lasombra in particular place a strong emphasis on confession, although without redemption. The Lasombra are also noted for a strong fascination with chess. The game serves as a metaphor for vampiric existence, or at least that's how the Lasombra see it, and consequently any Lasombra who plans to get anywhere in the clan is proficient in the game. Finally, something must be said about the impact that the Lost Visage has on the Lasombra. The clan weakness makes it impossible for a Lasombra to ever see their own image again. Mirrors, photography, and other reflective media fail, and the Lasombra react to this problem in a variety of ways. Clan culture places a strong emphasis on not overreacting to this problem. It is generally acceptable to sit for a portrait every few years, but extreme reactions, such as hiring a Samichi to flesh sculpt a ghoul, is considered a breach of good taste and grounds for diablerie. Prospective sires of Clan Lasombra seek erudition and ambition in their potential childer. As such, many Lasombra come from professional backgrounds and display outgoing and even aggressive personalities. Merit in their sires' eyes take fledgling Lasombra far, and the keepers do not hesitate to call their ranks a flawed, lazy, or boorish childer. The Lasombra embrace is notably sadistic. The clan generally has traits that they are looking for: strength of will, ability to manipulate events, self-control, and an ability to evade the limelight for positions of power. When a candidate is identified, the sire will usually test the candidate. Testing, in this case, generally means totally destroying the target's life and seeing how the target reacts. If the candidate falls apart, they were obviously unworthy of the embrace. If they can continue to survive and then overcome the challenge, then these challenges tend to become more extreme, until the sire decides that the candidate has demonstrated enough merit and is taken into the clan. As a rule of thumb, the Lasombra generally do not embrace that many shovelheads, a term used to describe a vampire who has undergone a particular form of mass embrace employed by the Sabbat. Although becoming true Sabbat after being shovel-headed is a sign of talent, the Lasombra generally prefer to be choosy. According to Vampire the Masquerade 20th Anniversary Edition, these are some of the Lasombra opinions on the other clans and factions.
They believe themselves lions, but possess only the ways of jackals. Petulant whelps in a rage over their own loss of rule from a self-fulfilling prophecy. Peer too deeply into the darkness, serpent, and you shall find that it has the means to smite. Every society needs its beasts of burden. Their inner foulness manifests in their every action. The fool does not dine at the table with the lords. They are martyrs, not monsters, and their faces are the stigmata they must bear. Filth, suitable only from which to make an example. A rose plucked from its garden remains lovely for only so long before it crumbles to dust. They revere only themselves, and they will reap a just reward for the sacrilege they practice. Although we may share a common goal, a murder of crows is always an ill omen. Such a misguided effort to use the scepter of kings only to hide oneself from his lessers. Who would wish to dwell in a castle that closes its gates for fear of unruly peasants? imperfect, and thus in need of ever more investment. They must never be equals, it is enough that they think they are.
Now I'd like to hear your thoughts in the comments. What do you think about the Lasombra? Are you hoping to meet some in Bloodlines too? How would you feel if you were embraced into their clan? What clan do you think I'm covering next? I make videos multiple times a week, and every Monday is Masquerade Monday, so if you enjoy what I do, please consider hitting that subscribe button. A huge shout out to Ian Watson, aka Fun Aether, for his help with compiling the info for this video, and for offering insight into Vampire the Masquerade lore. These videos literally could not be made without him. Thank you so very much for watching, it means the absolute world to me, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye!